reference or what these various different cards meant, and I thought, oh, that reminds me of that. Like when lockdown happened, it was almost it was a relief, because like it was like, oh, I can do whatever I fucking want now. And so I just kind of indulged myself. I did lots of meditation, and one time meditating, because I knew what I wanted to film, the final thing to do. I've been kind of aiming at that for a while. I've done a lot of reading, yada, yada, yada. And like as I'm meditating, I was just thinking, oh, I could just throw cards and just do that. And that idea popped into my head. I went through I did the thing, so it's a grand tableau, is what it's called. You use 25 cards, 5 by 5. And then one card is a signifier, so that symbolizes the person who you're asking a question about. And then there's another card outside that kind of sets the tone. So the first card you see is the Knight of Cups. And yeah, and the Knight is kind of like not quite as powerful as a queen or a king, but it is someone on a journey, and cups are like the symbol of feeling. So we mentioned it, there's a guy I was reading called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he is this guy who came up with the notion of flow. So he's a psychologist who was trying to figure out how great artworks happen. And then one thing he's asked, oh, what's behind it? And he said when he's talking to artists who are making great artworks, what they often find is that every single stage, they don't know what's going to happen next. So using an unconscious mechanism, so to speak, it was kind of a way of forcing that type of process, so to speak. And Jung talks about the archetypes, where he says that when you're dealing with the archetypes, there's a certain thickness, you know? And so the richness of the associations was just a way to kind of, oh yeah, that reminds you of that, that reminds you of that, that reminds you of that. Because it wasn't just Christopher Alexander was reading, it was kind of people similar to that. So for example, in the first section, you hear John Moriarty, who's an Irish philosopher who, you know, talks about what he talked about.
I mean, I suppose it's interesting. It's your voice, I believe, that we hear at the very beginning of the film, where you talk about the idea of calling something into being.
Yeah, like Christopher Alexander, he talks about treat everything like a being. So it's literally just late at night, before he even made any of the films, I just kind of started talking, right, I'm just going to summon this thing into being, and I'll talk to it as if, well, you know.
Yeah, and I suppose it's interesting to think of the relationship between the film and the tarot in that way, that one is attempting to summon something that exists already or has a being already, and there's a gulf that must be crossed between one as the artist and the artwork that pre-exists in some form, and to outsource to a randomizing device like the tarot enables us to sort of remove our consciousness from the making. Is that?
Yeah, there's a science experiment where you give people 10 different cards, say, and each card has like 4 things about it, and your job is you have to figure out which card is the best one to buy. And the two groups are, one group just try and figure it out, like thinking about it, and the other group just play Sudoku for 10 minutes. And the ones who just played Sudoku for 10 minutes actually did a lot better than the people who were trying to consciously do it.
Yeah, we know, but our knowing prevents our knowing.
Yeah.
I suppose I was interested also in talking maybe a little bit about its properties as a film. If I could speak just briefly about my own experience.
Yeah, sure.
I hadn't seen the film before today, and this is my first time. And I work in what I suppose one might call commercially distributed narrative film. And one of the things I find very frustrating working in that is that there is a perceived absolute relationship between film and narrative. And one of the things that narrative is an interesting device, but is also, I think, something of a try. I remember reading the American writer Maggie Nelson, who wrote a book with the Argonauts, a book called The Red Parts, speaking about story, and she says that when I hear people talk about the essential human need for story, I want to run for the exit, because stories don't explain us to ourselves or help us understand ourselves or any of this kind of bullshit that people say about stories. They editorialize us, they flatten us, they simplify our experience to the point that it's supposedly universal but in fact meaningless. And I suppose one of the things that I found quite moving about watching your film was recognizing scenes and sequences from narrative films, abstracted from those films in such a way that I wasn't being called upon to think about some stupid anecdote about, you know, the imaginary people, and was able to experience the film in a different way and see different, to experience it free from narrative. And yeah, I am thinking specifically of Jamie Lee Curtis and John Travolta. You know, Perfect is one of those films that's always described as kind of, you know, a disaster. And yet I found it extremely beautiful in the context of your film, and funny as well. But I'm interested, I suppose, in how you chose the films that you excerpted from or sampled from, how much you want the viewers to come to these images freighted with pre-existing knowledge of those films, and how much you're trying to manipulate the baggage that we may carry to this already knowing those images from somewhere else.
I guess because we spoke about this. I remember going to the Venice Biennale in 2013 and seeing this film in the African part, where there were three things going on at the same time. You had the image, you had the text, and then you had the voiceover. And it wasn't the image, it wasn't the text, it was wasn't the voiceover, but somehow between the three things, a different meaning kind of came about, and kind of being conscious of that. So, like, for example, with the second part of it, which is the story about the woman and the fairies and the big early, that symbol was to do with the goddess archetype. So, manifestations of the goddess is like the Virgin Mary, it's like Cleopatra, it's the witch. And then, as I'm making it and putting it together, well, I'd get the card, I'd read the association, oh, that reminds me of that, that reminds me of that, that reminds me of that. And I kind of downloaded shitloads of films and I just kind of take the clips and just see what kind of knits it together. Like with the one where it's just like the long talk about the ecstasy of Saint Teresa, that clip, I only wanted it for the images of it. I was going to read the description of the experience she had, and in that clip they actually mentioned the same bit of text that I was going to do, but I didn't realise that at the time. And I thought, oh wow, this whole thing, I'll just pop it in. And it worked, you know? Like it feels like it makes sense in that context, even though it feels different watching it in the context of the film than it does watching that talk discussion on YouTube, say.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I was quite amused by the inanity and redundancy of some of the things that they were saying. It was the school of heroes that's describing what you can quite clearly see, a form of art appreciation. I suppose one of the things that I liked about the film is that, you know, oftentimes when we come to this kind of collage cinema, what we're expecting, I guess, in post-modern, whatever we are now, is some kind of ironic juxtaposition where mockery of the source material is created through the, you know, when you're creating meaning that exists between an audio overlay and a pre-existing image, we're quite accustomed to that being used to mock the image. And I found quite moving in the film the moments where the relationship between the stories that were being told, or the interview material, or whatever the audio was, and the film image was actually quite direct. I thought, and honest. Just I'm thinking of the images from, is it a Miyazaki animated film where
My Neighbor Totoro. Yeah.
The shoots are shown coming out of the ground at the same time as the speaker is speaking about something almost identical. So I suppose, is that a question or a statement?
Well, things clicked into place. Like when you're mucking about with these things, like for example, that clip, there's a bit in it where it cuts straight to the guy working in the lab, and John Moriarty mentions working in the lab, and like, that wasn't deliberate. I just stuck the film in Premiere at that point, and then when I played it through, that bit synced up perfectly. And similarly, like with the segment, it took me a while to pick the song, but when I played that song, I just saw the heads as they're going like that, goes to at the start. And so I know, that's the one.
The song being the Bob Dylan song?
No, the song being Enya.
Enya, of course, yes. I wanted to ask about the use of the Bob Dylan song as well, because another thing that it made me think about is we were listening to the architect speaking about the awfulness, I suppose, of our built environment.
Yeah.
And then we're watching imagery which is largely from entertainments.
Yeah.
And it made me think, I suppose, a little bit about how we have become conditioned not to expect pleasure from our physical environment, or not to expect aesthetic gratification from our physical. We're conditioned to expect a hideous world.
Yeah.
Yet when we encounter film, we come to it with an expectation and a sense of entitlement that what we're going to see will be beautiful and entertaining and pleasurable.
Mm.
And so it's almost as if what we have a right to expect from our lived experience has been relegated to the screen. And when the screen refuses us that, we're resistant to it, or people are resistant to watching that. And so I was wondering how much with this film you want to provide pleasure and fun.
I don't know. I always I like the idea of just making entertaining stuff. You know, I'm in my family. I'm the kind of one who went to college and is interested in wordy shit. But I've always been conscious of the fact that my brothers are all working trades and things like that. You know, I don't want to make things that they find boring. I want to make things that are kind of joyous and making those. I don't know, I remember when I was in Joan Fowler's class and she was kind of explaining minimalism, and I just kind of got it. You know, oh, that's what it's fucking about. It's not a trick, it's just the thing. And it was almost I felt elated afterwards. And the word aesthetic literally means feeling. Feeling, sorry. It's not a visual thing, it's feeling. Anesthetic is something that numbs you. They don't use, and in art we use the word anti-aesthetic, not anesthetic, which is kind of curious in and of itself.
I mean, one feels a certain guilt sometimes with the pleasure that